Okay. So, Dr. Abebe, I think we are now ready to start.
Okay.
You're very welcome to this webinar hosted by Cornell Alliance for Science. And today we are excited to talk to quite a number of people who are watching us from all over the world. I can see Christy Dixon is online and she's saying good morning from St. Louis. Good morning, Christy, and everyone else from US. Good afternoon to people in Africa. And I don't know what time it is in Asia. You're very welcome to this webinar. And today we are hosting Dr. Abebe Menkir. Dr. Abebe has a PhD in plant breeding from the University of Kansas, and he's been breeding maize for the last 24 years. He works as the head of maize breeding in IITA, that is the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, and he's based here in Ibadan, Nigeria, where I'm also currently based. So he's going to be our host this afternoon, and he's going to tell us everything about maize, how maize can contribute to food and nutrition security, especially during this time of COVID-19, when people are not working full-time, when salaries, jobs are being lost. How can we maintain the nutrition and food security of our homes? But he also mentioned that maize, especially the yellow corn, is very high in vitamin A, and he's going to tell us how we can leverage that vitamin A in yellow corn to boost our immunity during this time when our health is being threatened globally. So Dr. Abebe, you're very welcome, and let us start this discussion.
Okay, thank you, Patricia, for your kind introduction.
Yes.
And
I think we are losing you, Dr. Abebe.
hello, do you hear me?
No. And
hello?
No, I can't hear you. And you're looking away. Dr. Abebe, please move your laptop this side so that we can look at you. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That
okay.
is the better. Okay. Let's try and see how this goes. So Doctor, let's go to our first question.
Okay.
Tell us about what you think the impact of COVID-19 is going to have on food and nutrition security in Africa, from your perspective as a breeder.
I would say, the African countries are truly endowed with 25% of the global cultivated area which is suitable, for crop production. That would be sufficient to feed its own population. And yet, many countries in Africa are net food importers and spend more than 65 billion US dollars on food imports, in addition to what they produce locally.
Okay.
The overdependence of many African countries on food imports is primarily driven by urbanization or increased demand from the urban center, which is exacerbated by weak infrastructure and also inefficient production practices that leads to low agricultural output. I think this places many African countries at a significant risk of exposure to the export bans that a few major food exporters have imposed on the wake of COVID-19 epidemic. In addition, the general food import syndrome that made many African countries to think that they would be receiving food for their population is increasingly undermined because of COVID by the difficulties in international and regional trade, as many countries are continuing to close their many African countries are have already been battling with food insecurity because of outbreak of diseases such as measles and necrosis, polar armyworm, and currently locust, as well as the climate change and the associated frequent droughts and heat stress, which have negatively impacted, on the lives and the livelihoods of millions of African smallholder farmers. Because of this situation, at the moment, the more than 600 million people in Africa which are already exposed to food and dietary deprivations before the onset of COVID-19 are the most vulnerable. In fact, on food production and distribution in Africa, where farming accounts for about 60% of the total employment. And I personally affected, the food production in the continent. It has also brought an opportunity to the governments of the various countries to think strategically and come up with approaches, that will emphasize to protect their vulnerable population.
Thank you, Dr. Abebe, but your audio is not very clear. I would like to ask the participants to tell us whether they can hear you very well, or else I would recommend that we reschedule this webinar for another time, maybe tomorrow, because your audio is really not clear. Let me see what our participants think about this, so that we are better, that we get better audio and we can communicate. Otherwise,
I think maybe I would like to suggest, since I'm working in the house today,
yes,
maybe reschedule. If you are not hearing me, and if I cannot interact with the participants very well, it's not really very productive for all of us. So maybe.
Oh no, people. Doctor, people are saying that they can hear you.
Huh?
I've gotten some response. Yeah, people are saying the audio is clear. Maybe the problem is on my side.
And then there are questions coming, from the audience.
Yes, but right now I had asked them about the audio, and they're saying they can hear, but there is a buzz. So, Dr. Abebe, you have told us that Africa is definitely bound to be affected by this crisis, because most African nations are net importers of food. So with all these with this lockdown and transportation transportation having, of course, when countries lock down, transportation is also affected. So there is definitely going to be there is going to be a crisis because of the movement. But before we continue, I would like to ask you, why is Africa generally a net importer of food? Why can't we grow at least 90% of the food that our people consume?
You know, the productivity level of our major crops, the staple crops, has stagnated over the years. So the amount of food that we are producing domestically cannot match the growth of the population and the demand that we have, particularly in the urban centers. There is also, when you look at the demographic change that is happening in Africa, most of the young generation of people living in the rural areas are migrating into the urban centers. So the people, you know, in the rural areas, in the farms, are the older generation of people, and the productivity level, due to the lack of improved management practices, lack of inputs, lack of access to credit, and all this have negatively affected the amount of food that is produced in Africa. So with the explosion of the demand in the various countries, imports became really the necessity. Okay.
Yes. So, but so how do you recommend that we fix that problem? How do you recommend that Africa fixes the problem of being a net importer of food?
More resources to increase productivity and build resilience and self-sufficiency in food production and distribution that work for smallholder farming communities to mitigate food shortages arising from COVID-19 and also potentially for future pandemics. That can be achieved by supporting resilience of smallholder farmer community, so that at least the future potential shocks and impacts are minimized.
Okay.
An important aspect of building the resilience for these communities is to ensure that the staple food crops that have smallholder farmers are produced, become productive and nutritious, so that farming families derive both the health benefits and also the livelihood benefits, you know, from the crops they grow. Resilient farming communities can have food and nutrition security through just to rely have access to markets at the same time. It's not only production, they need to have access to markets.
Okay.
The people who are working off farm. Hello?
Hello? Dr. Abebe, my network is really disturbing us. Initially I had thought it was you, but my network, let me find better network. Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for your patience. I now have better connection.
Okay.
Dr. Abebe,
Yes.
let us continue with our discussion.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've described about some potential approaches that can be taken, you know, to build the resilience of smallholder farmers in Africa in terms of crop production and also improving their potential livelihood and nutritional security.
Okay.
So continue with the next question.
Why do you think maize is a potential crop that can boost resilience in food production in Africa?
I would like to say that history is always a guide to action. So I want to bring some historical information related to the introduction of maize and how maize has become really an important crop in sub-Saharan Africa, and why it could contribute, to overcoming, the problem that we are confronting. So I would like to start with the history of maize introduction into Africa. Maize arrived in Africa apparently through different routes during the Columbian, what they call it, or Columbian era or event, around 500 years ago. And at that time, it was serving as a vegetable crop from the garden, which was consumed at milk stage, boiled or roasted. And as a fast maturing crop, it became, in fact, a low labor requiring food source for rural communities when the food reserves were depleted before sorghum, millet, and other indigenous crops were harvested. In fact, a tidal wave of maize swept the diverse production environments across Africa in the last 500 years, displacing the indigenous African food crops such as sorghum, millet, and rice. This happened because maize had the capacity to fit into the prevalent diverse farming systems, and it had a broad adaptation to diverse environmental conditions, and it was easy to process and required less labor to produce. And at the same time, it was also resistant to pre-harvest bird damage that plagued sorghum, millet, and rice. And these conditions were instrumental into the spread of maize in Africa.
Okay.
Maize offers a high return on investment in land, labor, and cash compared to all other competing crops that made it really attractive to African farmers. I would like to cite an example, an African example, the view that was expressed, by one of the writers from the Yoruba tribe about the productivity of maize, which I got, from maize and grapes. He said, all naked, maize went to the farm, and she came back with 200 dresses. 200 dresses. All alone, maize went to the farm, and she came back with 200 children. 200 children. This really beautifully explains how maize was viewed by the indigenous people and its production potential. The Africanization of maize took place across the continent in fields where farmers were selecting for high yield, appropriate time of maturity, preferred color, texture and taste, as well as adaptation to the prevalent diseases and the climate. The diversity of introduction of maize allowed farmers to choose the taste, appearance, and the growth characteristics they wanted. As a result, African farmers incorporated maize into their diet, cultures, and traditions, and as an important source of their livelihood. It is genetic diversity. In fact, maize genetic diversity is the driver of all this. And it has transformed itself from a backyard vegetable crop to a dominant staple food crop because of the enormous genetic diversity it has, and allows the farmers to select what is good for their production condition and for their environment. The crop has achieved a prominent status in the African food supply and established itself as an intrinsic part of the national diet, despite the presence of diversity in terms of taste, traditions, aesthetic choices, and agroclimatic zones, because farmers could really select what fits for them. At present, maize occupies more than 40% of the total cereal production in sub-Saharan Africa, with more than 200 million people depending on it as a source of food security and economic well-being. Maize and its products represent 38% of the food supply in Africa and provide half of the calories and proteins in Eastern Africa and 1/5 of the calories and proteins in West Africa. Also, maize provides 50% of the total zinc and iron, which are essential elements for immune system and for survival of the people, and is also a good source of very many essential nutrients that are beneficial to human health and help prevent potential diseases that occur in the continent. So these are just the historical background of why maize can contribute, to alleviating the problems that we are seeing in the continent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. You have made a very strong case for maize, and clearly we can see that it's a leader when it comes to food and nutrition security in Africa. Just to recap a little bit of what you said for our viewers, you've told us that maize arrived in Africa close to 500 years ago, and the farmers adopted it because it's a low labor crop. It's not labor intensive. It has less post-harvest damage in comparison to other cereals. It's easy to process, given that people eat it roasted, which doesn't require processing, but also they process it into flour, which is easy, and it gives a high return on investment. The poem that you read for us is quite interesting. You go with one dress and you come back with 200. That's a really high return on investment. So if there are farmers listening to us, I think maize is a crop that we could consider planting if we haven't been planting it. But there are certain things that have caught my attention other than you saying that maize accounts for 40% of all cereal production on the continent. It accounts for 38% of food supply in Africa. That means on a daily basis, in 10 households, almost 4 households eat maize or a maize-derived meal per day. And it also accounts for 50% of the total zinc and iron intake on a daily basis. When people talk about zinc, iron, these micronutrients, maize rarely shows up when the nutritionists are encouraging us to diversify our meals. They talk about beef, they talk about beans. Maize never shows up on the list of nutritious food. If you could help us and expound more on the micronutrient capabilities, if I may call it that, of maize.
That's really a very good question. Maize, as a crop, has a tremendous versatility and a tremendous diversity which we human beings can tap, including nutritional quality. When you look at, the common maize that is being consumed, they really don't have a high level of iron and zinc that are required, to meet the daily human requirement in Africa. But still, as a major staple food crop, when it is consumed, it has, intrinsically, it has iron and zinc. It also, especially the orange maize, has provitamin A carotenoids, which are converted into retinol and become vitamin A suppliers. But the quantity, is low. That's why, we have breeding programs that are trying to boost the concentration of both provitamin A carotenoids and also iron and zinc, so that farmers will have access to nutritious maize products which can meet their daily requirements. And in fact, the maize is one of the crops which really allows you to use the diverse genetic resources, to create new types, that can address issues of nutrition, such as micronutrient nutrition, iron, zinc, and provitamin A.
Okay. So when it comes to micronutrients, yellow maize and white maize is commonly consumed in eastern South Africa, consumed by people. And when it comes to West Africa, white maize is really for livestock, and the communities here tend to consume more of yellow maize. Which of the two would you say has a higher concentration of micronutrients, yellow versus white?
Yeah, the white and the yellow maize, when it comes to iron and zinc and other minerals, calcium and so on, which are really required, and also a lot of phytochemicals that are required for human survival, I would say, they are comparable. Oh. But the biggest difference between yellow and white is the provitamin A concentration, the provitamin A carotenoids that you have in yellow, orange maize, which you don't have, in white maize.
Okay.
And the yellow maize, in some countries in West Africa, they also consume, white maize. They consume both white and then yellow maize. But what I see as the people in Eastern and Southern Africa when it comes to consumption, because most of the people, the consumers in Eastern and Southern Africa would like to have, white maize. Whereas, in West Africa, you can have, orange maize, yellow maize, and also you can have white maize. It's a mixture. So West Africa seems to have a more diversified diet compared to Eastern and Southern Africa.
Okay. So do you think we should be looking at biofortifying maize in East Africa, or IITA and partners can work towards efforts of introducing yellow maize and encouraging consumption behavioral changes? So that instead of breeding provitamin A into existing varieties, we just encourage people to eat more yellow maize. Which do you think would be more cost effective and adopted anyway?
Yeah, now they see it in Eastern and Southern Africa, and IITA in West and Central Africa. We have been working on increasing the provitamin concentration in the maize, and at the same time we are also trying to make the maize varieties and hybrids as productive as other white varieties, although there has been a lot of investment in the development of white maize varieties, in Africa. But, there is a tremendous prospect in terms, now we have, I can say, varieties that are really competitive with white maize in terms of production potential. And at the same time, some of the tastes are changing. Zambia used to be a country with a predominant preference for white maize. And due to, constant awareness creation and the development of a relevant provitamin A enriched maize hybrids, now the orange yellow maize demand is increasing.
Okay.
In Eastern and in other countries, it is also the introduction of these nutritious varieties is really changing the dynamic that is occurring over there. What I want to say, in fact, you just brought a very relevant question. Farmers in Africa at the time of introduction, when you look at the predominant colors at that time, they were not white. They were, red. They were purple. They were yellow. All kinds of colors were consumed, by our forefathers. In Africa, they were accepted. They were the ones who were integrated into the diets of the people and into the diets of the farming communities. And there was a historical reason why Africa changed from yellow to white maize. With the introduction of the most productive materials, from the US, the Hickory King and others, in southern part of Africa, the white maize became really a very productive maize for supplying, adequate quantity of food for people who were working in the mines. And at the same time, there was also a market in Europe for white maize that really drove this conversion of having, this diversity of maize types to white maize. So Africa has never been hooked to white maize throughout its history. This is really a very recent development, I can say, and I'm very, very confident we'll go back to our, great-grandfathers and also to our really rich history and bring back, those different colors into our food tables.
Okay, that's quite interesting. But in what you have told us is the solution to adopting agricultural products, new crop varieties. Because you said farmers moved from yellow purple to white maize because it had a high productivity and it had a market. So that means if we want people to consume more yellow maize because of the vitamin A content, provitamin A, as breeders, IITA and CIMIT, you should be working towards putting out varieties that are of high productivity. And of course, productivity, I think, will drive the demand and give farmers the market that they desire. But Dr. Abebe, I would like us to move on to our next point of discussion, which is how do you see maize contributing towards I wouldn't say alleviation, but boosting people's health during this time of COVID-19. Let us specifically talk about the yellow corn, the yellow maize, which you have said has higher levels of vitamin A. And as our listeners and viewers may know, provitamin A is what the body changes into vitamin A, and vitamin A is essential in helping our bodies to fight off opportunistic illnesses such as COVID-19. I know that we are calling COVID-19 a global pandemic, but when it comes to a healthy body, it's just reduced to an opportunistic illness. And if the body is healthy with enough vitamin A, we can see quite a number of people putting up a fight against this disease. So tell us how maize can contribute in this conversation of health. And also, I remember you mentioned that if you eat maybe a cob of yellow maize, then it is better than taking vitamin A supplements. Please remind us of that example and the quantities that we should be taking.
Yeah, I will be talking, at a larger level, what maize is capable of doing, to the continent, and what are the steps that are currently being taken, to address the issue of food insecurity in the continent. Before going into that, let me address the last question that you raised, the provitamin A enriched maize versus, supplements or fortified foods with vitamin A.
Mm-hmm.
The provitamin A maize is good not only for the poor people, but it's also good, for people who are replenished with vitamin A. When you take a supplement or a fortified food which has high level of vitamin A, if it is excess, it goes and then is stored in your liver. And that can really, if it is accumulated over time, it can create some toxicity to the body of the human.
Okay.
On the other hand, you may be replete, but if you eat orange corn with high provitamin A content, your body converts only what it needs and the rest is excreted from your system. That is, the potential advantage of using natural food, that protects us against, potential hazards associated with taking excess.
Okay.
Now, coming back to the potential contribution of maize to at least mitigation of COVID-19 pandemic, I personally firmly believe that COVID-19 pandemic is a watershed event in defining the historical direction of food production and supply in Africa to respond not only to this immediate threat, but also future pandemics. Many countries in Africa have considered accelerated domestic food production as an engine for attaining food and nutritional self-sufficiency. As maize has been part of the culture and diet of Africans, as well as has high yield potential, broad adaptation to diverse production zones, ease of harvesting, processing, and transport, it has a great prospect to significantly contribute to self-sufficiency in many African countries.
Okay. So,
as an example, I want to bring an example. The government of Ethiopia has chosen maize as one of its strategic crops to boost local food production and supply under COVID. In fact, the government has put an aggressive policy to promote use of improved seeds, improved maize varieties, irrigation, fertilizer, and other inputs, as well as improved crop management practices to attain high level of productivity in order to reduce dependence on imported food, and at the same time also at least saving some of the resources they have, some of the money they have allocated for food imports, which can be used for other development goals. So the African farmers need to a resilient production system that guarantees their food and nutritional security in the present pandemic, and also in the future, so that we have to build the resilience of the farming system. To build the resilience of the farming systems, farmers should have access to good quality seeds of high yielding, climate, pest, and disease resilient maize varieties, and as well as nutritious maize varieties of staple food crops, including maize, that are grown by smallholder farmers. These types of maize varieties are available from international centers and they can contribute really significantly to food and nutritional security. In order to strengthen the resilience of the rural communities, there are a lot of efforts that are going on now, including in the African Union, to improve access and availability of quality seeds of climate resilient and nutritious maize varieties through the private sector and other seed producers to reach millions of farmers with both limited and good market access. With COVID-19, the need for a strong immune system has become really a critical factor to improve resilience of the body to respond to complications and infections, complications associated with COVID infection. So biofortified maize can contribute towards mitigation of the compromised immune system. And this pandemic has brought a focus on the need for nutrition security through production and consumption of nutritious food through diverse pre- and post-harvest technologies that increase agricultural productivity for food and nutrition security and improve the human immune system. When we when maize established itself as a dominant crop in the early days, some of the indigenous people had really a serious concern. And I would like to quote one of the concerns that was expressed by the indigenous people of Dahomey, indicating that their kings reserved millet, which is an indigenous crop, for royal consumption, in an effort to save this traditional crop from the rapid incursion of maize. These were the concerns that were expressed, by our forefathers. And I personally believe that the availability of enough grain from highly productive maize as a cheaper source of food can in fact free land for cultivating other diverse nutritious crops that will help, in fact, diversify the diets of the population, which is ultimately the preferred choice. Considering the extent of our African forefathers' experience in growing and consuming maize with a variable rainbow of color and types, I hope African consumers will overcome the white grain syndrome and embrace other colors for their common good and survival. I just would like to finish my discussion with this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. This has been quite an eye-opening discussion. And for me, as a non-scientist, just a maize consumer. By the way, I love maize a lot, especially the white one, because I come from an area where we eat white maize. But I'm now going to look for the yellow maize and grow it and consume it more. We look at maize and its products, flour or posho or ugali, like people in East Africa may call it, like a source of carbohydrates, and that is all. All these other micronutrients or minerals, we are unaware that maize provides this, and this is an awareness that this is a conversation that we should increase its awareness. I would very much like to see governments take on school feeding campaigns, where schools, especially primary schools that have young children, where they are encouraged to eat more yellow maize, yellow posho. I don't know how that would taste, but that is a campaign that I would like to see IITA, CIMIT, because CIMIT is the CGIAR center responsible for East Africa and South Africa. I'd like to see our partners, NARO and CALRO in Kenya, take on this conversation and really escalate it to policy levels. So as this conversation comes to an end, our participants, both on Zoom and Facebook, we want to thank you very much. We are going to put up a recording. We are going to put up a recording of this on YouTube so you can share it with other people. But we want to give you an assignment. I hope you have been blown away by the new information of provitamin A and zinc and iron in maize. So we want Africa to go back to consuming more yellow maize. Like Dr. Abebe said, it's not that white maize doesn't have provitamin A, it does, but the levels are really low, and especially for our primary schools. I hope you will join me in escalating this conversation to policy level. For me, I will task Dr. Abebe, he's just my neighbor here. I will task IITA and CIMIT to really escalate this conversation, and we see young people feeding on yellow maize. But for the rest of you, I don't know how you're going to take on this challenge, but I throw it back at you. And the beer is saying it's really inspiring, and I am happy choosing maize as my research crop. Yeah, so the beer is also a breeder like Dr. Abebe. And to the rest of us, thank you very much. Have a good evening. I want to rush out of this place and go and buy some roasted yellow maize. Thankfully, I'm in a country where people eat a lot of yellow maize before the market men and women leave the streets. But Dr. Abebe, your last remarks. I also have one last question. Does white maize have zero vitamin A, or it has some levels?
No, it has zero vitamin A.
It has zero.
Zero.
Okay. So your last remarks. You have been our guest. You should have the last say.
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone, for putting their time, spending their time, participating in this wonderful conversation. For some of us who have been in this business with maize, who would like to champion its potential impact in sub-Saharan Africa. I think I'm really very happy. I would like to thank all the participants, for taking the time and, at least having the interest. And I would like to also add my voice to Patricia that I hope you will take this message to colleagues and people who really doubt that orange maize doesn't have really any place, in the white, in areas where white maize is a dominant crop. So I hope diversity is the name of the game. Now, dietary diversity requires, not only one crop. I'm not preaching the gospel of maize alone.
Yes.
But also the highest level of food, at this juncture. There is food shortages. We need to focus on crops, that are highly productive. And at the same time, we shouldn't also forget the indigenous nutritious crops, which have been really the backbone of the population of Africa. So we still have to also work on those disadvantaged, diverse crops that can contribute significantly to our nutritional diversity and will make our food more interesting. So my last message is, I thank all of you very much for having me to speak and to discuss these various issues. And I hope we'll continue to interact. If you have issues and questions and so on, please drop me an email and I should be able to respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Abebe. Thank you very much to our participants. Have a good evening and buy some yellow maize as you go home this evening. Thank you very much.